I'm a member of the Free Press. I think that's really the bottom line. I live in a very interconnected world with family who are actively officers, very honorable officers who teach a different methodology than the city life gets. And my father was a cop for near on a decade.
And so why do you do cop watching then? I mean, well, you're press, so...
Well, I do all of it though, right? Like I've been
Yeah.
listening to some of the conversations that have been going around, and if you think about videotaping a protest as a methodology of educating and communicating with the community or the world at large, gaining sympathy, supporters. If you consider how an atrocity can occur in a community and people are going to speak about it and they're going to have activities or actions or things to say about it, but you can't turn on Fox or NBC or CBS and watch that as full scope to really understand what the story is. I started understanding this in the fight to educate people about GMOs and pesticides and how modifying our food has an impact on our bodies and our DNA and in the science of things.
How did you meet Eric? Can you talk about, like, and use Eric's name in it so we understand?
Yeah. I first came to know Eric Brandt in the streets of Denver as a transplant. My grandfather was born here, and I came to Colorado to study water and finish off a degree and head off into the world as a scientist. Right, I'm concerned about plastic pollution, and that's where my channel, Cut the Plastic, the name, and all that comes from. So I met Eric through the community actions that were happening in Denver, Colorado. When I moved here in 2012, there was actually a countdown between the number of days that police officers had killed somebody, right? Like you have no accidents at work for how many days? The police haven't killed anybody for 3 days, for 5 days, 0 days, right? It was consistent and it was problematic. So Eric was out there. I remember a turtle that he had that was big and made out of foam or something, painted up, and carried it on his shoulders, and it was articulated in some manner. He hung around with people that were at the Capitol. Denver and the Capitol, that's the place to be. The 16th Street Mall is a walking mall. It's a pedestrian space. So it's basically a free pass to protest here area. And that's how I came into Denver, experiencing what was going on in the community.
And what did you think of Eric when you first met him?
You know, there's a lot of characters in Denver at the time. This was shortly after the last Occupy city, Denver, Colorado, had been dismantled by the police department. And when I mean dismantled, I mean their structures and their downtown encampments were finally taken down, and they were no longer camping on a daily basis. So lots of people, lots of members of the mainstream, more mainstream media like Unicorn Riot, lots of occupiers. Soul is a musician that was active, and there's lots of different groups. The communists, the socialists, so there's just people, and Eric is a character amongst them. He came and went in his own ways, but he definitely drew a crowd. People paid attention to the words that he had to say, and he was always able to articulate a message very clearly what the problem was, even though he was loud and maybe distorted. If you slowed it down and played it over again in your head, you could understand what was going on and that there was a reason for it. So, I really valued what he had to say, and he actually had an impact on me.
When you say impact, what do you mean? Like, what did he shape your way of thinking, or what did he?
Well, for me, like I have a background in a wide variety of areas in life, from being FBI and TSA background certified to run security at air shows and 20, 30,000 person events where my name just locked the doors on everything, right? To being in Bourbon Street, preaching the word of Jesus Christ. And so being in Denver and seeing radicalized people that were radicalized but in a different way, it shaped me. And so interacting with Eric pre-graduation was definitely, modeling and seeing other people in the community, paying attention to their methods, allowed me to shape my own ways of communicating and being involved in the protests. I think it was my second time I was out at the Capitol. I was arm in arm on the 16th Street Mall, locked up against police officers who were beating people because we were marching down the street. Like it was a very radicalizing experience, and definitely Eric was one of the members of the community that had a shaping and understanding how clear communication about issues and really knowing what it is that you stand for made a difference in how people received him. I think there's too much noise. And that's the problem. If we lived in a science fiction version of a world where there was peace and harmony and outlandish things happened on a rare occasion, you wouldn't have to be as loud about them for that to make a difference. George Floyd died on my television. I'm glad none of my community had to do that. So Eric walks a line, but he uses words. And that's the best thing about it, right? That's what makes all of it outlandish, is that our speech is the primary thing that makes our democracy work. Our right to our opinions, to not always be right, but to have a place at the table where we can communicate the issues, to come to consensus and agree that the thing that we're communicating about can be modified or changed. Our world isn't modifying or changing as greatly as it has the potential to, right? We have 37,000 people at the last annual count that don't have places to live in the Denver metro area. And Eric was speaking about these things when our numbers were 3,000 to 5,000 consistently.
So homelessness has gone up that much in
The last decade?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Jesus. Do you I mean, Eric, so you both kind of have a science background. A lot of people have said Eric, is pretty smart. Do you think he's pretty smart?
He's absolutely a genius, a savant. If you really look at the attention to detail that he does put into things, then only when we lose our rage and we reside in understanding why we should be angry. I live in a world where we howled at night for our nurses, but they don't bang the pots and pans for consistent change. Eric beats the pots and pans, right? He's out his window yelling, shit is fucked up and stuff, right? So I came to Denver because I knew that this thing that I was called to needed catastrophic examination of how it's done and change. It's hard when you own it and when you live in it, and it becomes your breath, your daily function, to not become jaded, not become biased, to stay open-minded. It's impossible. In the language of one of the oldest texts that people recognize as existing in one way or another, the Bible, they say that Jesus tipped the tables in the temple, right, out of rage and anger. Because when you're watching it happen around you, and you're like, this has to stop, this has to change. And in 10 years, all they've done is tripled, quadrupled down.
Sounds like it's taking us.
You know, I remember the day that Janet, I was overseas after graduation, and I came back, and I was blessed to have a space to know that I was coming to in this community. Being houseless is a real issue. So knowing that I was housed, knowing that I was living in a space where it was an open door policy, the showers, the bathrooms. If you need to come by, you could stay a night a week, and so maybe 5, 6, 7 nights a week, there was somebody sleeping indoors, staying alive, staying safe, having a mental health space as well. And that changed. It changed a little bit because it was the same person as a third coming in to stay. And I knew Eric, so that was cool, you know. But it opened my eyes to a higher level of the layers, right? You can read Dickens or Shakespeare and understand that the history of man is a layer of struggle between the haves and the have-nots. But as the population grows, the variance between the haves and the have-nots grows as well. And so, people lost their eyes and have died and gone through so many things. We have an infrastructure right now where people will go to jail instead of fixing the system, right? If you don't do it their way. And that's the problem, right? Because when you play by their rules, they change them, they break them. And so my history with Eric is being involved in catching them breaking their rules, getting them to change. And I can think of lots of actual things, like allowing a homeless person to use the public bathroom at City Hall because they have numerous stuff, their possessions, but the rules are that they must be allowed to enter with it. That going to jail for sleeping on the sidewalk didn't mean that your property was taken from you because you locked it up outside the courthouse. They don't advertise it very well, but we do, right? We do everything we can to be out there and educating directly. And that's the lessons that you learn from somebody like Eric, is that it's the duplication of the activation of humans, right? If a democracy is the voice of the people and the people instruct their government, then enough people have to understand very intentionally and very specifically what their rights are, what their authority is as a species to change, to create a change that allows a police officer to stop rapists, murderers, to ensure the harmony is maintained, because an accident gets lights flashing to help assist somebody who's guiding the operations, right? Because if if an ambulance and a fire and police are supposed to like help save people's lives, if there's an accident on the highway or an ambulance or an earthquake, then that's what they should be there for. And if there's a way to solve the issues at hand with humanity, then that should also be the case. So if you are not rich enough to own a pair of shoes, you should be able to move on the bus because you've been called to court for sleeping on the sidewalk, right? You shouldn't be afraid that turning yourself into the hospital because they're going to take your toes means that you're going to go to jail for 6 months because you forgot a court date because you're not rich enough to have a phone and they can't reach you because you don't have an address. And so when they get you in the hospital and you wake up and your toes are gone, there's not handcuffs attached to your wrist, right? These are the human conditions that are why shit is fucked up. Somebody shouldn't go to jail because they coordinated with some churches and some other organizations to make sure that people that are traveling near a location that is populated a little bit with passerbyers have an opportunity to get free potatoes, right?
So, if we're kind of running out of time.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. We're just running out of time. Just so people, because you've been very eloquent in the way. How would you? So people who see Eric and say, "Oh, he threatened a judge. He's crazy," and use his name in this. How would you explain to people who don't understand him?
Eric Brandt articulated everything to change the law. Eric Brandt articulated everything to change the law. I'm sorry, that's my phone. Eric Brandt articulated everything, not only to change the law, but to enforce the law as it existed. He showed the Supreme Court of the state of Colorado that the municipal courts were requiring information that was void in law because the courts themselves indicated what was allowed to determine if a poor person deserved a lawyer. He went through the process himself as a living example. That man was so brave that when somebody faced felony charges, he said, "No, you didn't charge me. You better charge me too." And he proved in state statutes now, in law, in case law, that educating the jury about their conscience is the requirement of the people, but they're free to do it, right? So if we don't defend our speech and our actions, then there's accountability to be had, and there's a problem for it. The Colorado 8-9 were people who said the judges haven't even filled out their oath of office. They don't understand that there's a document that is a pledge. The president doesn't take office until a judge gives him an oath of their office. The judge has to take an oath of office too. But in Colorado, there's been a failure to do that. And when we exposed it, instead of amending it publicly, they did it through closed doors. When we exposed the problems that happened in the courts in Denver, Colorado, right now, if you apply for a public defender, you use the state's website, the state's application, all state laws are applied. But he's going to go to jail for it. He already went to jail for 58 seconds of outrage while I was live videotaping their fraud. They had manipulated the documents of application so that they could require fraudulent documents to prove how poor you were. They were telling poor people, go give blood, go give plasma, sell yourself. Get a document from the people that you're sleeping on the couch of. If you panhandle money, get affidavits. That's the outrage that they were not allowed to do. If you're a veteran who served in our military and you earned a disability income, you're not required to provide it to apply for a public defender. That's the law.
So is this also if Eric was?
This is why he's going to jail. If he gets convicted, okay? He pled. This is why he pled. I'm afraid he's going to jail.
How do you feel about that?
I'm outraged. Because he showed the courts. The Supreme Court had a full review, a panel. They impaneled his paperwork. They reviewed his case. They declined to rule on it. Because all the stuff was there. It was absolutely correct. The law existed.
Is he your friend?
Yes, he's my friend.
We'll talk about him as your friend, not as an activist, but just as your friend.
It's impossible to talk about oneself as an activist as a friend without recognizing that work. Because I've stood by his side. I've been caged with him, and I've been mad at him for it immediately. But I'd do it again. Because his anger and his justice, at the injustice, it's valid. But it's expressed in such a way that you and I don't have the time to pay attention. Because the courts were given all of it. In a court of law, a judge blatantly refused to do the instructions his superiors had given him and the state government had made into statutes. These are the steps of the process. I've watched court after court and go through those steps. And the process has changed significantly.
So just to wrap it up, what do you want people to know about Eric? Like just as a person?
He's a great human being, right? He's crazy, but there's a line in the sand. And the line in the sand is, I'm using words to tell you that I'm mad at you. You've done the wrong thing, right? It has literally taken a man dying on live television to awaken a nation, right? To the point where our nation's capital is caged and fenced in. It's embedded with a military that is of the people, the National Guard, to protect it from burning down. And Eric has served, and he's spoken, and he's been madder, and he's been staying on his cause. In the last court date where my video evidence sentenced him to jail, the judge said that Martin Luther King and Malcolm X stood tall, recognizing that their jail time was a necessity. I'm surmising. And that as we walked into the sentencing and going to a jail sentence, that we knew that our advocacy to change the world and to face the right things were a risk. It's a risk that I wouldn't have been, and I'm not as willing to take. But I've stood by him in his willingness to take it, and I absolutely consider Eric my friend.
And I think that's very important for people to know.
Are you off roll?
I can be now.
No, you can leave it on. But what I'm about to say hasn't happened yet, and I don't want it, obviously, to be a time frame.
Okay, this can
But my grandmother's actually in hospice right now on her deathbed. And it's the last, I know, right? But our lives are short. And if we don't take the time to live them, right, then, you've talked a lot about the activists I've listened to the extended world, and you don't even know how much more there is, right? I know that people around the world have stood up, and they've been a little bit braver because they've seen Eric's work. Like, I know of somebody that you videotaped in the last 72 hours that was overseas filming a protest happening at an international airport, right? They, there's been people who call their local jail, or they go out and they step out of their house instead of being in a Fahrenheit 451 kind of world where the screens are there, where in the world of Disney and Pixar's Wall-E, you have people just watching screens everywhere, right? They're living it. They're off their chairs. They're off their couches. They're on their feet. They're mad as hell, and they're not going to take it anymore, right? And so what has been building in the world are people who are recognizing that their personal lives make a difference and that their voice matters and it will be heard. The community at Extended names hundreds and hundreds of people. The work that happens locally, the work that it gets duplicated in other places, right? So my personal professional stuff is being duplicated, right? When we feed people and we have plates and silverware that get washed every week, right? It's an extension of we care about, we do, we're living. Not everybody's a protester. Some people are growing food. Some people are watching the court and making sure.